And I think that's a big concern. What else? Where do you see that? I feel like I've been yammering about this,
Oh
and I
no,
do
no,
want to
I think
like pick your brain here.
no, no. It's actually particularly the idea of habituated attention has a lot to do with really identifying areas where you say in a sense of agency, we can actually do things to change ourselves in positive
Yeah.
ways. Not only to meet norms or expectancies externally, but more internally in terms of things we can do to make ourselves more effective. A lot of ways, the theory of the S factor is about personality effectiveness, becoming an effective person. For example, one of the areas I saw was a lack within myself. Really, when I was, I was started. I went through years of kind of treading water and so on, and just getting by. And then when I got to college, I became motivated to try to change who I was. And I started to take a look at, I inventoried myself and took a look at the areas where I had weaknesses and so on, and things that I could think I could change. Like one of the key areas I had was I got a fear of failure, and so if I didn't, I could never fail if I didn't just say study for a test because I always use that as an excuse, so I didn't study.
Yep.
So that's
I
why I
didn't
failed.
study, so that's
Right.
why. That's
That's
why I
why.
didn't do well.
Yeah.
You know.
Or I procrastinate. I say I'll do this later, but I never do it. And
Yeah.
what I found was if you can kind of look at it from the standpoint of instead of not trying, actually to try, right?
Yeah.
Instead of not studying, actually to study, and see what happens. If you find you actually do something different in terms of you actually study for a test rather than allowing fear of failure to block you from actually studying, and then actually you do well and you succeed, and that just encourages you to do more. And also, the S factor is basically all the elements of it are all interrelated. If you see yourself starting to succeed, then you begin seeing yourself in a more positive light, affects your self valuing and so on. And so it's all
Well,
interrelated.
yeah, and I would say one of the things that jumped out at me as you were talking about that is I think there's so much I think especially in education we have this sense of like, well, we want to give kids the tools.
Right,
And so often we get into this is how you study.
right,
This is how you do XYZ, right? And I think sometimes when we do that, we take away the sense of agency when we frame what we're presenting as this is the way as opposed to this
right.
is a way. And it's actually something I actually like about, God forbid I admit that I actually like something about Common Core. But the actual standards themselves, one of the things I like about them is that they're about saying, here's what you're working towards, here's a goal.
Yeah,
However you get there is
right,
valid.
exactly. Exactly.
And and
Exactly.
the ways that we can instill that, the problem then becomes is not that standard, it's the way in which we test it,
Right.
wherein you have to know the way they want you to do it for the purpose of a test,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And so then
Right.
that negates and actively like sort of and it feels like a big lie.
Yeah.
It feels like it's this very sort of hypocritical feeling that I think we get.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly. Touching on that, I just remember thinking back in my college days, and I remember taking this one course, and it was on, I think, the French Revolution of Napoleon. And I remember having this instructor. My friends told me the only way to actually pass this course and get an A is to take his notes and just memorize everything, and so on. Just memorize it. Just get it down and so on. Just keep going over and over and over until it's memorized. And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to study for meaning, understand this, and so on. And I did that, and I presented my perspectives and so on. I ended up getting a C,
yeah,
on the test. The next for the final, I said, okay, I'll just memorize everything. I did. I got an A. But the reality is, I learned much more when I
right.
was actually approaching it for trying to find things which were meaning to me, which were significant, major concepts, and so on, things were relevant to my understanding. And it was, yeah, I could memorize, I could get an A in that way, but it was actually much less of a learning experience when I actually approached it from the standpoint of trying to find meaning and significance and concepts that meant something to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I we need to go because we're running out of time for this, but I do want to touch on really quickly one last thing with Nora and our kind of case study here is there's so much that I think we find as we study, in my impression, having looked at human developmental stuff, there is really, everybody talks about the like nature versus nurture
Right.
issue. And the thing is that there absolutely is nature, but the problem is I find that the pathology often is rooted in the nurture side of things.
Right.
Yes, neurodiversity leads to delays in certain brain functions occurring, and with ADHD, there's a delayed, uh, a cognitive delay in the frontal cortex kind of
Right.
processing, right? And we know that. And the thing is like, but if that individual is simply supported until that brain processing is done, and
Right.
and sometimes and that includes things like pharmacological things,
Right.
etc. But when we support that person, then it doesn't appear, it stops being a disorder, and it just simply becomes part of that person's state of being.
Right.
And I find that so much of what we find in terms of developmental disorder is really out of the sort of treatment that that person receives.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so, like, how many people with ADHD would have RSV, or RSD? Sorry, RSD, not RSVs on the brain because but rejection sensitivity dysphoria,
Right. Sure.
which is something, and I'll come out, I'll say that's something I actually that is a very big problem for me. And especially in higher ed, turns into what we often describe as imposter syndrome, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but like part of that story that I shared with Nora is this sort of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, this assumption that simply because she is seen as different,
Right.
she gloms onto and assumes and begins to internalize the sense
Right. That's the
of
problem.
being wrong or being out of
Right.
place, being
Exactly.
incorrect, and therefore being rejected
Right. Exactly.
as a person. And to
Right.
say that are, and it's important to realize that something like RSD doesn't happen alone.
Yeah.
you know
Right.
and that we develop maladaptive traits. I think you could even look, and again, to not to harp on Vygotsky, but I think you can look at sort of developmental processes. We can see the ways in which the environment shapes maladaptive development. We
Right.
develop behaviors, we develop approaches, we develop perspectives on the world that are actually problematic,
Mhm.
as a response to the way in which we interact with other people. And where Vygotsky comes in is all development is fundamentally social by
Yeah.
his approach.
Yeah, I disagree with that in a lot of ways because I think there's two realities we all experience. It's our external reality, our social
Yeah.
reality, and so on, and our internal reality. And I think what's really more important to me is our internal reality. And we
Mm-hmm.
interact certainly with the exterior, with culture and so on. But I think what's really more important really is our internal reality in terms of how that changes and how it's transformed, how we emerge really as a person and so on, how we see life, how we think about ourselves, how we think about our culture and so on. To me, the internal reality is more, not that I value Vygotsky. I think it's very
Yeah, yeah,
important.
yeah.
But the other side of it is like what's more important is a person's internal reality and how that's shaped, how that emerges. And just give people time, just like maybe Einstein wasn't ready to learn math when he was 6 or 7.
No.
But
Ex-
later on, he was able to come up with these tremendous insights into the nature really of science and so on, scientific methodologies and so on. He
and I would
became
say that
very
I would say
doing
that
time right.
perspective I would
Yeah.
say that perspective actually doesn't invalidate Vygotsky
Oh, it
once you
doesn't
start to
validate it, but it's
engage.
just different. It's a different way of looking at it.
But yeah, no, I think I really appreciate that, because I think the way in which I framed it, or the question that I was sort of raising, I like that nuance of understanding like that there is an internal locus that we need to pay attention to,
Right.
as we look at this,
Right. Exactly.
but I do, but I guess my thought is that I do feel like there are things that we could do structurally, societally, as educators, as the more knowledgeable others in an individual's life, to influence and give them the
Yeah.
opportunity to see
Right.
themselves
Right. Exactly.
in in a way that is more self-reinforcing.
Yeah, there's a synergy between the internal world and the external world. That's what we're really looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
synergy between the two.
So we are desperately out of time, but I do want to touch on. Could you remind everybody specifically the names of your two books, and where you would prefer people to get them? Because I bet it's not Amazon.
It is Amazon, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
actually, the books I wrote basically was really more for a popular audience. It wasn't really for an academic audience per se, although it only has applications and so on. One is the S Factor, the psychological roots of success, and the other is learning how to succeed. And they really they contain both a lot of case studies, really, in terms of talking about some of the things we're talking about today, in terms of
Yeah.
how individuals find avenues of success. And it's not just success in terms of necessarily, I think most of the case studies we're dealing with in the books are dealing with individuals who achieve great things. But I'm working on a book now which probably gets into more of the everyday life of individuals who a person is a teacher and makes great contributions as a teacher. And that's a great form of success. Or a child might be handicapped in some way, but they find ways of dealing with their handicap and succeeding in their own dimension, their own life, and so on. The success is something that only has to do with one's own sense of meaning, in a sense of the value of what one's accomplishing, and essentially enabling a person really to succeed. That's what the book's really about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm really excited for people to see it. If you're seeing this here on YouTube, wonderful. I'll be posting clips of this to TikTok as well, which hopefully will bring people back and forth, so that this whole conversation can happen.